All right, welcome everyone to our training webinar. Today we're going to be covering Atlas protocols for Missouri and Nebraska Bumble Bee Atlas participants. Just a couple quick housekeeping things to go through before we get started. First off, this webinar is going to be recorded, so if you happen to miss something as we're going through the content, don't sweat it at all. You can go ahead and looks like Brett raised a hand. Sorry, Brett. Brett, just to let you know, you have to join through the link that we sent you as a host to join so that you can introduce yourself. So please use that link if you have it still. Okay, so sorry about that, everybody. So quick housekeeping things. This webinar will be recorded. Don't worry about missing something. You can always go back and watch it on your own time. The link to the webinar will be made available on the Bumble Bee Atlas website, and then it will also be posted to the Xerces YouTube, so you can find it there. And then if you would like to if you have a question for us at any point during the webinar, please use the Q&A function and type out your question. We can answer some of the questions live. We're going to take some breaks to answer questions periodically through the webinar. And then we can also answer your questions by typing out responses. So if you think of something while you're watching the webinar, please just post it in the Q&A as soon as you think of it. And with that, we can start with some intros. I can go first. My name is Genevieve Pajesic. I am a conservation biologist with the Xerces Society. I'm one of the coordinators of the Bumble Bee Atlas in Minnesota, Missouri, Iowa, and Nebraska, so working primarily in the Midwest, and I am based in St. Paul, Minnesota. And Katie, I'll jump to you. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Lamke. I am also a conservation biologist with Xerces. I'm based here in Lincoln, Nebraska, but I run the Atlas projects in North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Minnesota, and I work very closely with Jenny to make sure that all of these are successful. And we have the help of Jared here with us today, too. Hopefully, in the next couple of minutes, our Nebraska partners will sign on. I think they're having some issues with the link right now, so Jared, go ahead and take up as much time introducing yourself as you want.
All right, I'll try. So I'm Jared Brabant. I'm at the University of Missouri. I'm a fourth-year PhD student now, working with bumblebees, doing pollinator habitat management, studying a few projects revolving around that. And then for the Atlas, the last couple of years, I've helped on the Missouri side. I've tried to ID as many bees as I can that you guys send in online. It's been awesome. You guys take a lot of really good pictures, so thanks for making my job easy. I don't know if the Nebraska folks have gotten on yet.
I think they might be watching the webinar,
Okay.
but unfortunately, they will not be able to introduce themselves on video. Maybe if they are able to hop on at the end, they can say hey to all of you then. Okay, cool. So as Katie and I mentioned, we both work for the Xerces Society. Xerces Society is a major partner for the Atlas projects across the United States. We're a science-based nonprofit organization that's member supported. So thank you to all of our donors, if there are any in the audience today. The Xerces Society was founded more than 40 years ago and is named for the now extinct Xerces blue butterfly. If you are interested in joining Xerces as a member, you can learn more about us and the work that we do at xerces.org. Right. Just as a reminder, this is the second part of a two-part training series for our Missouri and Nebraska participants. If you haven't gotten a chance to view the first part of the webinar, there is a link on YouTube up of a recording of the webinar that we held on April 13th. So Katie or Jared will post that for you all in the chat. If you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, please do so. The first part of the webinar dives deep into bumblebee ecology and conservation and can provide you some of the contexts that you need to understand the Atlas protocols and goals if you are a new member of the project. We have a lot to cover today. We are basically going to be breaking up the webinar into 3 parts. During the first part of the webinar, we're going to talk about past progress of the Atlas program in Missouri and Nebraska, specifically focusing on some of the work that we did in 2023. And then we'll also be covering our goals for the 2024 field season. During the second part of the webinar, we're going to talk all about protocols, how to sign up for the Atlas, how to conduct a survey, how to submit your data. And during the last portion of the webinar, we're going to talk about how to identify bumblebees when you're out in the field. So to get started, let's talk about where we're at with the program. The Bumblebee Atlas is a community science project focused on tracking and monitoring bumblebees. We are now based in 20 states across the US, 7 states in the Midwest, so considerable coverage of the continental United States. The Bumblebee Atlas is a collaborative effort. We have many state, federal, and NGO partners who we could not do this work without. In Missouri and Nebraska, we work specifically with the Missouri Department of Conservation, the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, and then Mizzou. So thank you for all of their support and their efforts and help with this. To collect lots of data across the region that we're working in, we rely on the efforts of community scientists like you. Community scientists go out and conduct surveys for bumblebees, and from the data that they collect, we can establish baseline data sets. We can use those data sets to do things like monitor population changes, characterize the distribution of different bumblebee species in the region, and fill knowledge gaps related to habitat associations. We can then take that information and use it to form evidence-based recommendations for practitioners to restore habitat and to better protect the species that we care about. Since 2019, when the Nebraska Bumble Bee Atlas was first launched, participants in the Midwest have made some outstanding progress collecting data on bumblebees. The Missouri and Nebraska Atlas projects are 2 of our longest standing projects. Nebraska Atlas was established in 2019, and then the Missouri Bumblebee Atlas was established shortly after that in 2020. And we've had a lot of time to collect data in both of these states. As you can see from the maps here in Nebraska and Missouri, we've collected quite a few observations of bumblebees, as well as quite a few surveys, which are represented here in the squares. This amount of effort would not be possible without the work of our volunteers who have helped achieve this nearly statewide coverage. So far, we have collected over 20,000 observations of 28 species in the Midwest, and that represents 2,600 surveys by over 350 participants. So truly an outstanding amount of effort. Prior to the start of the Atlas, the data that we had on bumblebees in the Midwest was sparse. Folks were submitting their incidental observations of bumblebees to Bumblebee Watch, but most of these observations were clustered around population centers like Lincoln and Kansas City and St. Louis, so urban areas. But what we really want when we are trying to understand animal or a species and its range is large, wide coverage. And that would include rural areas as well. The Atlas framework has really helped us improve our coverage of the region. Not only have we collected far more observations of bumblebees, we've also gotten better spread of observations across both states. To encourage participants to survey across the entire state, we break up the state into grid cells. People can go out and survey within these grid cells, and by doing so, we are encouraging folks to get outside of urban areas and into more rural and undersurveyed regions. In Nebraska, we have made some amazing progress since 2019. Volunteers have collected 8,916 observations of bumblebees since the start of the project. 2,051 of these were collected in 2023, and 97% of these observations were verified. So folks went out and took photos that were so good that we could easily identify them to species. Over the course of the project, so since 2019, participants have encountered 14 unique species of bumblebees. A lot of the observations collected by participants are of more common species. So species like the brown-belted bumblebee, the common eastern bumblebee, etc. But we've also collected some really great data on rarer species. And in 2023, we had our very first observation of Morrison's bumblebee submitted to the Atlas from Western Nebraska. To date, all of the grid cells in the state have been surveyed. In 2023 alone, 46 of the 78 grid cells in the state were surveyed, so 58% of the grid cells in total, which is, I think, excellent progress for a single year. As you can see from this map, there are no grid cells which had 0 surveys, which would be represented by hash marks across the grid cell. In many of the grid cells in the eastern part of the state, we have had 13 or more surveys submitted since the start of the project. With some of the more rural more of the rural regions of the state in the center of the state have fewer surveys, but we still have good coverage overall. We've hit every single grid cell at this point. Looking at the number of observations, we see similar patterns. Where we're spending more time surveying, we are collecting more data, and so we are finding more bumblebees. Once again, we see higher numbers of observations coming from the eastern part of the state, which is represented here in the dark blue. The lighter colors represent areas where we haven't had quite as many observations in the central part of the state. In Missouri, we had a bit of a record-breaking year in 2023. So since 2020, 7,119 bumblebee observations have been collected. 3,188 of those were collected in 2023 alone, which is just absolutely wild. That's almost half of the observations that we've collected in total. 91% of these were verified to species, so folks were taking really excellent photos of the bees that they were collecting so that we could identify them down to species. So far, since the start of the project, we've encountered 8 unique species in Missouri. And once again, like in Nebraska, we generally see the more common species come up the most frequently. So common eastern bumblebee, brown-belted bumblebee, two-spotted bumblebee make up the majority of our observations. But we've also collected some really excellent data on species that are rare or at risk. Thanks to our participants, we hit a major milestone this year. All of the grid cells in the state have been surveyed officially. In 2023 alone, 84% of the grid cells were surveyed at least once, which is truly a phenomenal effort. As you can see, represented by the darker brown colors and then the darker blue colors here, we have the most surveys and the most observations in areas of the state that are more urban, so around St. Louis, around Jeff City, Kansas City, and St. Joseph. But we still have achieved that full coverage of the state. We've already learned so much from the data that our participants have collected. In past years, we have used this data to explore bumblebee floral associations and create habitat management guidance for folks who are out on the ground managing the land. This year, we looked at some of the habitat data that you all collected to see if bumblebee abundance and species richness was related to habitat management and quality, and we found some cool patterns. Firstly, Atlas participants tended to find more different kinds of bumblebee species in areas that were burned or mowed, which could indicate that disturbance is important for bumblebees when we're trying to manage the habitat for floral resources. Generally, participants found more bees in places with more flowers, although these patterns weren't super strong. If you are interested in learning more about what we found, please check out our season summaries. They are up on the new website, and you can go to our data highlights page and then kind of explore the data for yourself. We have also used past data to inform new conservation initiatives. The Target Zones program was launched in 2023. This is an effort to learn more about at-risk species in the region by focusing our survey effort in areas where at-risk species are most likely to occur. In the lower Midwest, there are 8 species that we are particularly interested in. 6 of these species occur in Nebraska. The American bumblebee, Morrison's bumblebee, the Southern Plains bumblebee, Suckley's cuckoo bumblebee, the variable cuckoo bumblebee, and then the Western bumblebee. All of these species have been petitioned at one point for federal protection because they've undergone major declines. And many of them are species of greatest conservation need in Nebraska. In Missouri, there are 4 species that we are particularly interested in. So once again, the Southern Plains bumblebee and the American bumblebee are both species of greatest conservation need in Missouri. And then we also have the yellow bumblebee and the half-black bumblebee, which are species of greatest conservation need in the state. In Missouri, we have used Atlas data collected in past years to identify areas where we think that at-risk species are most likely to occur. So we took all of the detections of these specific species and built a 10-kilometer buffer all around them. And then we have marked each of these as what we call target zones, so these areas where we think that they are most likely to occur. In Nebraska, we used a similar process to calculate target zones. We took data collected by Atlas participants for the Southern Plains bumblebee and the American bumblebee, as well as historic data for the other bumblebee species that are in the state but haven't been encountered that frequently or at all. And we use that data to calculate buffers. For Nebraska, we also incorporated some land use information because in some areas, bumblebees may be less likely to move through an area. For example, bumblebees might be able to move through a grassland more easily than they could a vast agricultural area. So we incorporated that information as well when we were calculating buffer zones. So we have these specific regions that we're very interested in for all of our species of for all of our species of conservation concern. So we have gotten off to a really great start. In 2023, 32% of the target zones in the state were surveyed in Nebraska and 60% were surveyed in Missouri. You can view those here in these maps. The shaded areas represent the target zones that were surveyed in 2023, whereas the areas that are just hatched have not been surveyed. So the more of these target zones that we are able to survey, the better we can monitor these at-risk species. So we really want to focus our efforts on getting all of these target zones surveyed by 2025. Our goal for 2024 is to increase participation in this program. To participate, all you have to do is survey within a target zone in your grid cell in either July or August. So in June, you can survey within your grid cell like usual. In September, same thing, you can survey as usual during those tail ends of the survey window. But we want to focus on surveying within target zones in July and August because that's when bumblebee abundance is at its peak and we're most likely to encounter those species of greatest conservation need that are at risk. Right, so this framework allows us to gather novel locations of species during the tail ends of the season in June and September, while still repeating our effort in the target zones to help inform conservation efforts. Right. This program is not required to participate in the Atlas, it's just encouraged. Any delayed data that you happen to collect in your grid cell is super valuable, and we use it in our analyses. It's incredibly important. But we do encourage you to participate in this program if you are interested, say, in exploring a new site in your grid cell or adopting a new grid cell and checking out a new region. Definitely give the target zones map a look and see if you can concentrate your survey effort in one of those target zones. Okay, so before we move on to the next section, we can take a quick break for questions. Katie and Jared, did you happen to see anything pop up in the Q&A?
Nothing has popped up yet.
Okay.
Our Nebraska partners are, I don't think they're going to be able to log on for whatever reason, so I guess we can just give them a brief introduction for people in Nebraska. We work very closely with Nebraska Game and Parks. They're supporting the project. So if you see Brett Anderson or Cody Dreyer floating around, they both work for the agency. Brett is the Natural Heritage Program Manager and Cody is the pollinator ecologist for the state. So they both do a lot with helping the project run successfully. So if you're participating in Nebraska, you'll likely hear their name or maybe run into them in the field.
Awesome, thanks, Katie. All right, so let us move forward then with the next component of the presentation, how to get involved with the Atlas, how to conduct a survey, and how to submit your data. All right, so if you are interested in participating in the Atlas and you're not already a volunteer, the first step is to adopt a grid cell. By adopting a grid cell, you're basically making a pledge that you are going to conduct at least 2 surveys for the Bumble Bee Atlas between June and September, and that you are going to submit your data to our online platform, Bumble Bee Watch. If you are a participant and you've already adopted a grid cell in past years, there's no need to re-adopt this year. We already have all your contact information and we know where you're surveying, so don't worry about it if you've already filled out the form for that. To adopt a grid cell, you will need to go to our website, bumblebeeatlas.org, to fill out a grid adoption form. And I'm just going to show you how to do that on our new website. The Bumble Bee Atlas website recently underwent a rebuild. And so we have an all new website. During the part 1 component of our training series, Rich Hatfield gave a little tour of the new website, showing off some of the great resources that we have available. So if you're interested in a little tour, please check out the webinar recording at the end. Around the last half hour or so, Rich goes through many of the different resources that are up online. We are just going to be talking about one of the pages right now, which is the Adopt a Grid Cell page. So to adopt a grid cell, you just need to go to Get Involved and then Adopt a Grid Cell. And that will take you to this page. The first thing that you're going to want to do when you adopt your grid cell is explore the different grid cells that are available. And you can do that by checking out this map. Looks like it was having a little bit of a hard time loading. Can you guys all see that?
Looks good.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Awesome. So when you navigate to the grid cell map, the first thing that is going to pop up is a little instruction bar on how to use the legend and how to use layers. Once you click out of that, you will be brought to the map itself. So as you can see, the Midwestern United States is divided up into these grid cells, and as you scroll in, you can view the actual grid cell labels themselves, as well as the map of our target zones for Missouri and Nebraska. To interpret the maps, I always find that it's really helpful to have the legend open. So if you want to open the legend, you can go to the left-hand side of the screen and hit this legend bar. It will bring up the legend for all of the different Atlas projects. So to access the Midwestern states, you're going to want to scroll down a bit. So now we have our legend open and we can interpret this map. So we have our different grid cells, as well as the target zones for the 4 different species that we're interested in Missouri. I can click on these target zones if I want to learn more about them. So this target zone is a target zone for the Southern Plains bumblebee. This red one here, this is a target zone for the half-black bumblebee. And I can also click on the grid cells themselves. The grid cell ID will come up once I've highlighted it. If you're interested in finding out what grid cell your community is in, say you are somebody who lives in Jefferson City and you want to know what grid cell you would want to adopt, if you're based there, you can Google or you can use the search bar to type in a city or an address or a latitude and longitude, and it will bring you to that location. And you can scroll in and out to explore the grid cell. I can see from the map that Jefferson City is located in grid cell number 47. So I can make a note of that. And then when I fill out the adoption form, I can sign up for that 47 grid cell. There are a couple other nifty things that you can do to manipulate this map so that you can use it to pick your survey location. There is a layer for folks who are interested in exploring public areas in their grid cell. It is hidden right now because there's a lot of public land and it's a little overwhelming with all of the target zones and the public land and the grid cells, but you can turn it on and then view the legend here. And as you scroll in, you can explore what public lands are in your grid cell. So you can click here. Oops. Okay, so you can click on the public land and it will tell you the name of that area, the person or the group or entity that manages it, as well as other information. So that's pretty nice if you aren't quite sure where you want to survey and want to explore public lands near you. So once you have determined what grid cell you want to adopt, you can scroll down to the bottom of the page and there is a form that you can fill out to adopt your grid cell. Once you've adopted your grid cell, you will get a confirmation email from us letting you know what grid cell that you've adopted. There's also a bit more information there about permitting. So you should receive that email after you have filled out the form, and then you're officially a Bumblebee Atlas participant. Oops. Okay, so when and where you survey is up to you. At a minimum, you are going to want to do 2 surveys sometime between June and September, which is our survey window. Those 2 surveys can be done on the same day if you're going to different locations, or they can be done on different days at the same location. It just depends on your schedule and what you prefer to do. You are going to want to go out and do your survey when conditions are optimal for bumblebees. You want the temperature to be at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Bumblebees don't really fly at temperatures colder than 60 degrees. I generally try not to survey when it's hotter than 90 just because it's not as comfortable for me as a person. Bumblebees will still be flying out at degrees higher than 90 degrees Fahrenheit, but it just may be less comfortable for you. You are not going to want to survey when it's too windy outside, so when the wind speeds are less than 15 to 20 miles per hour is ideal. And you also don't want to survey when it's actively raining outside. So when it's participating, it's not a great time to collect flying insects. Where you survey is also up to you. So you are going to want to choose a hectare-sized area somewhere within your grid cell. And this can be anywhere where you have permission or the appropriate permits to survey. You can survey on your own property or property owned by a friend or family member as long as you have permission. If you do survey on your own property, please keep in mind that you do need a hectare-sized area to survey. So if you have a really lovely garden out front, but it's smaller than a hectare, unfortunately, that would not count as a point survey for the Bumblebee Atlas. You would need a hectare of continuous area to survey in order to count that. You can also survey on public lands. So public lands are often owned or managed by a governmental organization like the city or county, the state government, or the federal government, or they could be managed by nonprofit organizations like the Nature Conservancy. Depending on who manages or owns that land, you may need a permit to survey on that land. We do have some guidance for our participants on obtaining permits. So at the state level, the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission is a major land manager in the state. And if you're interested in surveying on one of their properties, so something like a state park or a wildlife management area or state recreation area, you will need a permit to survey there. The Atlas program does hold a permit with the NGPC. So if you are interested in being added to that permit, please contact us right away to obtain more information. In Missouri, no permits are required to survey on MDC properties, but you will need to sign a volunteer agreement with the MDC and then send it to the appropriate property manager in order to survey on that land. There is also land managed by the federal government in these states. So if you're interested in surveying at a national park, the Xerces Society holds permits at multiple national parks. And if you're interested in surveying at one of them, please contact us and we can help guide you through that process. If you're interested in surveying on U.S. Forest Service land, you don't need a permit, but you should contact the appropriate district before you go out and survey for safety reasons. If they happen to be doing any management on that land at that time, they like to know when folks are physically present on their land. So you should reach out before you go out and survey to let them know when and where you're planning to survey. And then if you are interested in surveying lands managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, so a wildlife refuge or waterfowl production area, you do need a permit. We at Xerces do not currently hold a permit with them, so you would need to navigate that on your own if you want to survey at one of those particular areas. And I will mention also, these are not the only land management entities in Missouri and Nebraska. There are county parks, there are city parks that you may be interested in surveying. And if you would like to survey any of those sites, the permitting and permissions process is going to be different depending on who's managing it. So the first thing to do really is just reach out to whoever owns or manages the property and let them know you would like to survey there, and then they can let you know what you would need to do in order to receive permission or a permit to work there. Just a couple things to keep in mind when you're out surveying or navigating to a survey site. As an Atlas volunteer, we ask that you are respectful of private property. You want to ensure that you have permission from the landowner wherever you're conducting your survey activities. And unless you have explicit permission from a private landowner, make sure that you're staying on public lands or right-of-ways. And that includes both when you're actually surveying and then when you are just going to your survey site. Your grid cells may include both public and private land, and you should not be trespassing. So when you're at a site, please make sure that you're looking carefully for markers of private land and boundaries of public land. If you find yourself on private property without permission, or if you've been asked to leave at any point, please make sure that you leave immediately, even if you haven't finished your survey. And for your own protection from trespassing claims, if you do have permission to be on private land, make sure that that permission is written. Okay. And then lastly, if you're surveying on public land, please make sure that you are obtaining management permission for county, city, and local parks. There is more guidance on permitting, which is available online. If you go to our new website and go to the resources tab and click permits, you can find this guidance there as well. For our volunteers, we have volunteer cards available this year. All you need to do to receive a card is fill out a request form. This QR code will take you to the request form itself. These cards are great. They confirm that you are a Xerces volunteer. Like generally when I'm out and about surveying and I have my butterfly net, people get really excited and will be really interested in what I'm doing. So the volunteer card provides a phone number for folks to call if they have questions about the project or the activity. And it can also feel really nice to have a badge with you when you're surveying. It makes you feel more official and increase your level of safety and comfort. So if you are interested in receiving one of these badges, please make sure to fill out the request form by May 19th so that we can get it to you before the start of the field season. All right, so once you've planned out where you want to survey and when you want to survey, the next step is to do the survey itself. There are two components to every Bumblebee Atlas survey where you estimate bumblebee abundance. And there are two ways that you can complete that survey, either by doing a point survey or a roadside survey. And then you also do a habitat assessment so that we can connect what you observe for bumblebees with what's going on with the habitat surrounding it, your survey area. Right. So point surveys are the preferred way we ask you to survey. Basically, you choose a location anywhere within your adopted grid cell, and you're surveying like a hectare-sized acre. A hectare is about 2 football fields in size, or 2.5 acres. This survey area doesn't need to be in any specific shape. It can be a rectangular shape or it can be a really long shape. It's up to you, as long as it's a hectare in size. So once you've chosen this hectare size area, basically you're going to spend 45 minutes collecting bees, which you are going to put on ice and then photograph later. This point survey entails completing the abundance survey for bumblebees, as well as an assessment of habitat. So you're just doing one survey for bees and one habitat assessment survey. When you are planning your surveys, make sure that you let somebody know when and where you'll be when you're doing your survey, and then when to expect you back. This is just a basic field safety tip. You want to make sure that somebody knows where you're at, just in case you don't make it home on time or something goes wrong. So as I mentioned, a point survey takes 45 person minutes, which is the time that you spend actively searching. You don't want to include time you spend processing the bee or taking notes or putting bees in coolers during this time. You're only counting the time that you're spending actively collecting the bees. So sometimes if you're collecting lots of bees, it can take a little bit longer than 45 minutes to actually complete the bee abundance survey. I think it takes me maybe 30 seconds to a minute to process a bee. So if I collect lots of bees, my survey ends up taking me a longer amount of time. But we do ask that you spend that 45 minutes collecting because we want to standardize our effort across all point surveys. The second way that you can complete a Bumblebee Atlas survey is by doing a roadside survey. So to do a roadside survey, basically you are choosing a 10-mile stretch of road someplace within your grid cell and doing 5 mini surveys for bumblebees along that route. You basically want to make 5 stops that are half a mile apart. These stops are all 15 person minutes. each in search effort. So you're spending 15 person minutes collecting bees. Once again, you're not counting the time that you're spending processing the bee, you're just counting the time where you are actively looking for bees. Right. So to complete a roadside survey, you are conducting 5 15-minute surveys for bumblebees, as well as 5 habitat assessments. So you want to pair each one of your surveys with a habitat assessment at each stop. Once again, when you're doing roadside surveys, you want to make sure that you're respecting property ownership, local regulations, and posted signs. So when you're on a roadside, don't go past the fence onto somebody's private land. You want to stay on the public land next to the road. Once again, for safety, make sure that somebody knows where and when you're planning to survey. And it's also a really good idea when you're out doing a roadside survey to try to wear bright colors or safety vests, because you are near a road. There are going to be cars going by, and wearing a safety vest just makes you far more visible. Right. So after you've conducted your survey of bee abundance, the next step is to complete a survey of habitat. This can take between 5 and 20 minutes, depending on your level of experience and how complicated the area around you is when you're doing the survey, how many blossoming plants there are, what the vegetation structure is like, and that sort of thing. Basically, when you're doing a habitat survey, you are assessing the habitat around you and that you've walked through as you're doing your survey. So you're looking at the land cover that your survey took place in, as well as the land cover that surrounds your survey area. You want to quantify how many different species of flowering plants that you saw, how much of the area is in bloom, and then also what management is occurring at that site. Are you seeing evidence of things like prescription fire or mowing or grazing? Are you seeing nesting resources for bumblebees and that sort of thing? And these are by no means an exhaustive survey of the habitat. We're just trying to capture general information about the areas that you are searching for bumblebees. So before you go out into the field, you are going to want to get your field materials together beforehand. It's really important to make sure that you have data sheets. We actually updated our data sheets this year. So if you go to the Bumble Bee Atlas website and access the print materials, they may look a little bit different than they have in past years. Just a heads up, the content is the same. So you can use your old data sheets if you've already printed them, that's totally fine. But you will want data sheets so that you can record all of the data that you've collected. We also have ID guides and handbooks available online for you guys to print out. The ID guides are great if you want to guess what bumblebee species that you've encountered during your survey. We have guides that you can easily bring out to the field with you. They're just one sheet of paper that you can print out. And we also have handbooks which detail the protocols of the Bumblebee Atlas. So if you happened to forget one of the components of the protocol, like how long you're supposed to be out when you're doing a survey, or what size your survey area needs to be, the participant handbooks have all of that information already there, so you can reference that as you're doing your survey. You will also need some equipment. There are a few things at minimum that you need. Many of these items you might need to purchase. For example, I don't know that many people who have bumblebee nets lying around unless they work for the Xerces Society. So you may need to buy a net. You will need to obtain something to collect the bumblebees in as you're netting them. So we generally recommend plastic vials. You'll need a cooler and ice so that you can chill the bees down once you've caught them, as well as a camera so that you can take photos of bees. For nets, we recommend using a mesh aerial insect net. They make insect nets that are completely canvas, but you can't see through them because the canvas is quite thick. It's nice to be able to see the bee once you've netted it so that you can easily manipulate it into the vial. So when you are looking for a net, make sure to Google search mesh aerial net. Home science tools or forestry suppliers both produce pretty cheap mesh nets. So if you are looking for a starter net, we recommend both of those suppliers. Right. The next item that you are going to want to bring with you are vials. You should bring around 20 per survey when you're going out. We recommend using centrifuge tubes, which are either 30 to 50 milliliters, or a 5-drum pill bottle or vial. These are plastic, so they're really durable, and they're small enough that you can carry them with you into the field. They aren't completely immune to wear and tear, so you should periodically check to make sure that you haven't broken or cracked them, because if you do so, if they're broken or cracked, then they'll leak water in them, and that's not great for the bee. You also are going to want to make sure that your vials are washed and clean when you're using them. So each time you go out to the field and come back, you should wash your vials, either with soapy water or with a low concentration bleach solution. You don't necessarily have to buy plastic vials if you don't want to. Some of our participants will use things like jars or plastic tubs to put their bees in. It's a little bit harder to get the bee into a jar than it is to get them in a plastic vial. And also, jars tend to be kind of big and you can't fit that many of them in a cooler. So we highly recommend that you go out and make sure that you have some tubes or vials for your survey. You are also going to want, as I mentioned earlier, a cooler with ice. You want to use crushed ice to fill your cooler, so that way you can submerge your tube into the ice, so that way the bee cools down really quickly. You don't want to just throw your tube into your cooler, because if it's laying on top, the bee won't chill down quite as fast. You want to submerge the vial to the base of the cap, and you don't want to put the entire vial under ice, because, as we mentioned earlier, the vials can leak a little bit, especially if they're cracked. So if you submerge them completely in the ice and the ice melts, they may fill with water, and then your bee might get really wet, and then it might also drown, and we don't want any mortality. So it's best to just leave the tops of the vials above the brim of the ice. Please make sure that you're using regular ice and not blue ice, because blue ice is really cold and it's too cold for bees and may cause mortality. You will also need a camera so that you can take photos of the bees. We recommend using a camera with a macro lens or macro setting so that you can take pictures of the bee itself. Bees are really small, and so that macro lens makes a huge difference in capturing the level of detail that we need to identify those bees to species. Point and shoot cameras work, DSLR cameras also work. You can also use your smartphone if you don't have access to a fancier camera. They actually make macro lens clips for smartphones that you can purchase on Amazon if you are interested in taking macro photos with your smartphone, and they can make a really big difference in the quality of the images. But smartphone cameras are perfectly fine. Lots of our participants take photos with their smartphone and they come out really great. In addition to these items, you're also going to want to have a timer so that you can keep track of how much time you've spent surveying when you're out and about surveying, as well as a way to collect weather and location information. A smartphone can fulfill both of these needs. They have timers. They have the ability to take latitude and longitudes. If you use Google Maps or Google Earth, you can pin your location there. And then, if you have a weather app, you can check the temperature of the wind speed, both using that. And then lastly, you're going to want a writing utensil so that you can fill out those data sheets. All right, so a major component of completing a Bumblebee Atlas survey is taking pictures of the bees. All of our surveys are non-lethal, so after you've taken photos of bumblebees, you're just going to release them out into the wild. And so we need those photo records of the bumblebees so we can determine what species they are, so that we can confirm that we have seen a certain number of bumblebees in a certain area. Right. When you're taking photos of bumblebees, there are some key angles that you want to include so that we can identify that bee to species. The first thing you want to capture is the bee's head, particularly the front of their face and then the top of their head. Bumblebees have hairs on the front of their face and the top of their head that can help us identify them to species. Right, so this bee has black hairs on its face and the top of its head, which I can see clearly from this photo. We're also interested in the length of the bee's cheeks. Some bees have longer faces, some bees have shorter faces. So being able to see how long those cheeks are is really important as well. The next thing that we want to capture is the color patterning on the thorax. The thorax is the area of the bee where the wings attach, so that middle segment. We're interested in both the pattern on the top of the thorax between the two wing joints, as well as what's going on with the hair pattern color on below the wing. So it's great to get a top-down view as well as a side view of the bee that you're photographing. So this bee this is a really nice side view of this bee. You can clearly see that the hairs beneath the wing joints are yellow, and I can also see that there is a stripe between the two wing bands. The next part of the bee that you're going to want to try to capture is the abdomen. We are particularly interested in the colors of all of the abdominal segments. They all have names, so there is T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, T6. On males, there's also T7. Each of the colors of these segments is really important when we're trying to identify what species of bee we're looking at. We are looking at the color on that first segment a lot of the time. The second segment is really important as well. Basically, all of the segments are pretty important, actually, when you're trying to identify a bee. But you do want to capture all of those segments when you're taking a photo. So this photo of the bee, we can clearly see each and every one of those 6 segments. We can see that the first 4 are yellow, the last 2 are black. That's super important information when we're trying to make an identification. All right, so taking really good photos is super important. If you go out and do a survey and the photos are difficult to make an ID from, it's just such a bummer, because you've put in all this effort and time into going out, doing a survey, collecting all of these bees, and then if the photos we can't actually link to a species, it's just so sad. So we do have some tips for you all on taking really great photos of bumblebees. The first tip is to make sure that your photos are in focus. We want to clearly see the bumblebee and all of the features that we're interested in. Second, you're going to want to check your lighting when you're taking photos. It's best to check it when you're in the field because you can adjust your lighting. You can bring the bee into the shade or into the light, or you can adjust your camera settings so you're taking photos with the proper lighting. But you can also adjust the lighting of your photos at home on the computer if you need to. You don't want your photos to be too dark, nor do you want them to be too light. You want to hit that Goldilocks area where you can clearly see the colors and the patterns of the bee. The next tip is to take a photo of the bee on its back to get a good view of its facial features. When you're handling a little bee, it can be really hard to get it positioned so you can take a photo of their face at a good angle. A lot of the times when you're moving them around, they'll just tuck their heads in and you'll only be able to capture the top of their head. So if you flip them on their back, it's easy to get a photo where you can really see the cheek length and you can see the hairs on the front of their face as well as on the top of their head. The next tip is to make sure that the wings are spread when you're taking photos of bees. As I mentioned previously, all of these segments are important, but when the wings are folded, we often can't see the first two abdominal segments of the bee, T1 and T2. So you can pry the wings apart to reveal those color patterns underneath. You want to be gentle, but you can use your hands to gently move the wings. You can also use tweezers. Sometimes I've used a pencil to sort of shift their wings away from their abdomens. Whatever's preferable for you is fine. You just want to be able to see all of those segments when you're taking your photo. The next tip is make sure that you actually chill your bee and then take them out of the vial to take photos. If they're left in the vial, we really can't see that much when we're looking at the bee. A lot of the features become really difficult to see. Like I can see maybe that this bee has some yellow hairs on the top of its head. I can't really see its face. It just makes it so much harder to do an ID. So take them out of the vials when you're doing photos. Right, so the last tip, or wait, no, second to last tip, is to make sure that your vials are sealed before you place them on ice. As I mentioned previously, if they're cracked or they are not twisted on all the way, water can get into the vial and that will make the bee wet. And that makes them really hard to identify the species when their hair is all matted down. And it also puts them at risk of drowning, which is not great when we're doing non-lethal sampling. If you've printed out the new data sheets, there is a sheet with a grid, gridding pattern on it that you can use to take photos. So if you place that bee on the grid sheet when you're taking your photo, we can use that grid sheet to estimate how large the bee actually is, which is really nice because some bees are smaller than others. Some casts of bees are smaller than others, and that information really helps us in making an identification for some species. Right. While you are taking photos of bees, it's really important to keep track of which bee photo goes with which bee observation. There is a place on the data sheet for you to record that information called photo numbers. So generally when I am taking photos of bees with my cell phone or my iPhone, I will write down the time when I took that photo so that I can connect the bee observation with a photo taken at a specific time. If you're using a fancier digital camera, they will have numbers associated with each photo, so you can write that down. Sometimes people will, instead of recording the number of the photo, they will take a picture with the number of the bee written next to the bee. So, whatever's preferable for you is fine. However you want to keep track of your photos, you just want to make sure that you can connect the photos that you took with the observations that or the bees that you collected out in the field. Right. I would love to show you some more techniques for completing a survey. Unfortunately, right now I'm in my living room, so I can't show you how to catch a bee with a net. However, Rich Hatfield, who oversees the Atlas, has put together a really nice video on how to complete a Bumblebee Atlas survey, which goes through really specifically how you catch a bumblebee in a net, as well as provides some additional guidance on how to do a habitat survey, how to take photos. So if you are new to the Atlas and are interested in learning more, please check out that video. It is available online. If you go to, bumblebeeatlas.org and go to the resources page under survey protocol, you'll find a link to that video. And you'll also find links to many other resources that will help you in your surveying efforts. We have some photography tips, some identification resources, equipment lists, links to all of those print materials I mentioned, including data sheets. So please check out that tab if you have not already. There's some great information there. Right. If you want to get some hands-on experience with our field techniques, we recommend coming to an in-person field training event. We're holding multiple events in Missouri and Nebraska this year, mostly in June and July. So in Nebraska, we are going to be at Ash Hollow State Historical Park on June 1st. On June 22nd, we will be at Hastings Museum, and then on July 27th, we'll be at Glacier Creek Preserve. In Missouri, we will be at multiple different locations. Our first event is on June 8th, somewhere around St. Joseph. We haven't quite nailed down where we're going to be, but planning to be in that city on June 8th. On June 15th, we will be at Shoal Creek Nature Center. On June 22nd, we'll be at Riverlands Audubon Center. And then on June 29th, we'll be at Height Prairie. These events are super fun. We love coming out and meeting everybody, and they're a great way to practice learning how to net a bumblebee, how to put a bumblebee in a vial, how to handle them when they're cold. We practice taking photos, and then we also practice bee ID. So whether or not you are a long-term participant and just want to brush up on your bee ID skills, or you're a new participant and you need to practice catching bees, you all are welcome at these events. If you want to sign up for an in-person event, please go to our website and go to the events page. There is a form that you can fill out to sign up for our in-person events. I have not added the Missouri events to the form quite yet, but they will be up by tomorrow if you're interested in attending a Missouri event. And then for our Nebraska events, those are already up. So please sign up. We would love to see you in person. All right, so for the next part of the training, we are going to talk about how to submit your data.
Hey, Jenny.
Yeah?
Do you want to take a break and look at some of these questions really quick?
Oh, yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. There were a few questions, a few observations. One, just going back to events, Doug Helmers put one in here. He's going to do an event with Missouri Prairie Foundation down at Drover's Prairie on June 22nd, which is near Sedalia. So we'll be sure to send that information out as well. Thanks, Doug. Somebody had asked, Melissa asked, if they travel to different regions of the state, can they still submit for grids even if they don't adopt them? And I answered to that yes, you can absolutely submit data from whichever grid cell you want to. Just make sure to complete your 2 surveys within your adopted grid cell. There are some people that are participating in multiple states. So if you live near a border of Missouri, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, you can participate in multiple states if you want to. Just make sure to get your adopted grid cell surveys in. There was another one about the 2 different websites. So the Bumblebee Atlas has 2 websites. Jenny's about to get into the second one, but the one that she's been showing so far is bumblebeeatlas.org, which is the project website. So if you need information on the protocols or in-person events, or to download data sheets, or to join the forum, that's all going to be through bumblebeeatlas.org. And then when you're submitting your data, which is what Jenny's about to go into, that's all done through bumblebeewatch.org. So that's more of the platform that's similar to iNaturalist, where we're collecting those observations. But everything else you'll find at bumblebeeatlas.org. And then Carol left a comment about plastic vials. She said she gets some small plastic containers with lids from the Dollar Tree. So if you're looking for a cost-effective option, there's a good one for you there. And Kathy left a note that she's seen some bumblebees in her yard in St. Joseph. So queens are out and about.
Nice.
Yeah. And I think that's all we've had come in. So if you have any questions come up as Jenny's talking, feel free to put them in the chat.
Awesome. All right, so let's talk about data submission. So we do have some suggestions for best practices when you are submitting your data. It's best to submit your data as soon as you can after you've done your survey. If you wait a really long time, sometimes your data sheets get lost or you forget how you organize your photos. So as soon as you can, you're going to want to submit your data online. You want to make sure that you keep a good record of what photos go with which bee. We talked about filling that out on your data sheet. When you're going to submit your data, you want to make sure you have your data sheets with you. so that you can reference them as you are typing in your data that you filled out on your survey. And you're also going to want to curate your photos before you go ahead and submit them. You want to include the most useful photos with your submissions. The photos that are the clearest, that are at the best angles. So, according to those tips that we gave you, we have additional guidance on the website for choosing which photos you would like to include. So, as some of you may have already heard, the Bumblebee Watch website, which is our platform for submitting data, has undergone a major rebuild this year. So we're going to walk you through how to submit your data live, so you guys can get a sense of what the new website looks like. So I am just going to hop on there. All right, new Bumblebee Watch website. So the first thing that you're going to want to do when you are on Bumblebee Watch is make sure that you're signed in. I am signed in already, but I'm going to sign out just to show you what that looks like. So when you want to sign into your account, you're just going to go to your account and then hit sign in if you already have an account. Just a heads up for those of you who have not signed into their account recently. So if you haven't signed in to your Bumblebee Watch account since you submitted data last year, since the rebuild, we have asked all of our existing users to update their passwords. So when you go to sign in, you may need to do that. Please make sure that you have your old email, which you signed up for your account for, and use that email to make your new password. If you don't have a Bumblebee Watch account, you will need to go here to register. You'll just provide some information like your email address so that you can create your account. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in. I already have my username and password input, so I can just hit that login button, and now I'm into the website. So when you go to submit your data, you are going to want to go to this Add Bumblebee Sightings button here in this left-hand window. There are lots of other tools on the site, but today we're just going to focus on adding those sightings. So when you click on Add Bumblebee Sightings, it gives you the option to either submit an incidental observation through Bumblebee Watch or to submit your survey data through Bumblebee Atlas. We are submitting data for the Bumblebee Atlas, so we're going to hit Submit Sightings here. But if you have if you took a photo of a bee incidentally, by chance, you just saw a endangered bumblebee and you want to include it, please add that incidental sighting here on Bumblebee Watch. So navigating to submitting sightings for the Bumblebee Atlas. All the information that you're going to input is information that is on your data sheet. The first question that comes up is what is the location of your survey? There are several different ways that you can input that locational information. If you are a participant with the Bumblebee Atlas and you've surveyed in past years, you can choose a location from your locations. So if I wanted to input data for a site that I've already been to, where I'm surveying the exact same hectare area, I can input that here. If I surveyed a new area, or if I'm a first-time user and I don't have any locations associated with my account, I can go to add a new location. And there are two ways that I can add my new location. The first way is to just select the location on a map. So let's say I am filling out data for a survey that I did at Bluestem Prairie in Minnesota. I can type in the name of my site. Oh no, I can't spell the word prairie. Bluestem Prairie. All right, there we go. All right. So I wanted to navigate to Bluestem Prairie Scientific and Natural Area, and it has brought me to that site. I can change the view on the map, so I can change it from the map to the satellite view. So if I remember where I surveyed based on a feature, like a parking area or something like that, I can use a satellite to navigate to that specific area. For my survey, I surveyed an area right next to a parking lot, this parking lot, and so I want to mark that location. I'm pretty sure that that's almost exactly where I did my survey, so I can go ahead and set that location, and it will input the latitude and longitude. Because this is a new site that I haven't surveyed before, I'm going to give it a unique name. So I'm going to call it Blue Stem Prairie. Number 3, because I've already surveyed 2 locations at Blue Stem Prairie and I want this site to have a brand new name. If you know exactly what the latitude and longitude it was of your survey area, you don't need to select the survey site on the map. You can just type in the latitude and longitude directly, and that's totally fine as well. Either option is great. The next thing you want to fill out is how accurate is this location in meters. I know that my location was pretty accurate because I remembered exactly where that parking lot was. So I can click 0 to 25 meters here. If you're less sure of where exactly that location was relative to where you surveyed, just select the bin that best fits your survey. Right. I want to record next the day that I went out and I completed my survey. So I did this survey in 2023, really late submitting my data, did a bad job. Right, you want to submit these surveys as soon as you can, but let's say I haven't done it yet. Right, so I did this survey in July. I did on July 20th in 2023, so that is the day I went out and collected my data. The next thing I want to fill out is whether or not I did a point or a roadside survey, and this was a point survey. So I'm only going to fill out this, I'm only going to submit one form for my survey. If I would have done a roadside survey, I would need to do this 5 times, once for each one of my stops along my roadside survey. Right. So the next thing to fill out is the collection method that I use to collect bees. In general, you're going to want to click this first one, which is you tried to capture all of the bees that you observed during your survey. There are a few other options here. Some of them are really relevant to other regions of the United States. For example, in Iowa and Minnesota, there are some restrictions on surveying because there's a federally endangered bumblebee species present there. So in some areas, people can only take photos. Right, if folks are really overwhelmed by the number of bees that they see, sometimes they may only try to capture the bumblebees that look different so that they can capture what species are there, but not necessarily the bee abundance. But in general, you want to ideally capture or try to capture all of the bees that you observe during one of your surveys. And so I'm going to click this bin because this is what I tried to do when I did my survey. The next question is approximately how many hectares was my survey area? For point surveys, this should always be 1. We want to search 1 hectare for bumblebees when we're out doing a Bumblebee Atlas survey. The next bin to fill out is how many surveyors helped with this survey. So you don't have to do Atlas surveys all on your own. You can do them with a friend. You want the survey to be 45 person minutes long. So basically you would just split up the effort. If you are going out with one other person, then you would each survey for 22.5 minutes. If you're going out with 3 people, you'd each survey for 15 minutes, etc. I just went out by myself, so there was only 1 surveyor, and so I would fill that out here. The next thing to record is the start time and end time of the survey. So I went out at 7:52 a.m. And then I ended my survey at 9:50 a.m. So it took me about 2 hours to do this survey because I just collected so many bees. You want your start time and end time to reflect when you started and stopped your survey. The next thing to fill out is the survey length in minutes. For your point surveys, you always want that to be 45 minutes long. We're only counting the person minutes here, so even though I was out in the field for 2 hours, my survey was only 45 minutes long because I only spent 45 minutes actively catching bees. The next thing you're going to fill out is the weather information that you collected during your survey. So the temperature outside, let's say it was 75 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're more of a Celsius person, that is an option as well, but I usually record things in Fahrenheit. You're going to record the cloud cover. So on this day, there was 30% cloud cover and pretty low wind speed, 0 to 5 miles per hour. You're going to fill these out according to whatever you recorded on your data sheet. If you have any notes about the weather, there is the option to record that here. So if it's really smoky outside, you may want to write that down. It was really smoky on this day that I went out. You can write any notes about the weather that you would like to in this weather notes section. Right, so the next component of the survey is to fill out the habitat data. So the first question is asking what the habitat type is of the survey area that I surveyed. There are several different categories here. The area that I surveyed was a grassland, so that hectare area that I was walking looking for bumblebees was all grassland. The next questions ask about the surrounding habitat. So what habitat made up the surrounding area that I could see visually while I was doing my survey. So my grassland hectare that I was surveying was surrounded by more grassland. The bluestem prairie is a large prairie with lots of grassland around it. I did see some trees out in the distance. So I know that there was some woodland and forest in the surrounding area as well. I didn't see any other surrounding habitats, so I'm going to leave this last option blank. That's okay. If you saw less than 3 types of habitat, there's no need to fill out the remaining question. Right. The next question on the docket is how much of the survey area has flowering resources available. So this is in percent. I was in a prairie with lots of flowers. So approximately 40% of the survey area had flowering resources that were actively blooming at the time I went out and did my survey. I also noticed some nesting resources available while I was out and about walking my survey area. I saw some bunch grasses because I was out in a prairie. I saw some leaf litter, and I saw some rock piles and rodent holes. I didn't see any of these other types of nesting resources while I was out doing my survey, so I'm going to leave those blank. The next set of questions relates to the management of the area that I was surveying in, whether or not I saw evidence of mowing, livestock grazing, native grazing, agriculture, insecticide use, herbicide use, fire, or honeybees. While you're out and about walking your survey area, there are lots of things that you can look for that will give you indications that these management practices are being used. For example, if you are in a survey area and it looks like it's been mowed recently, you can indicate that you thought it was mowed. I didn't see any evidence of mowing, so I'm going to mark that as no. I also did not see any evidence of livestock grazing, right? So, I didn't see any scat from cattle, or I didn't see any fences. I didn't see any cows around me when I was surveying. I did see evidence of native grazing. So I saw a deer while it was running past. Or if I would have seen something like deer scat, I would know that there were large herbivores that are native that were using that area to graze, so I'm going to put yes. I did not see any evidence of agricultural activities around my site. So things like agricultural land, farming equipment, if there's a cornfield nearby, that sort of thing. I saw no evidence of insecticide use or herbicide use. So there, if you see something like recently sprayed garlic mustard or something like that, that would be evidence of herbicide use. I saw no evidence of fire. So if a property has been recently burned, you might look for things like ashes or bare ground that had been recently burned. Did not see anything like that. And I saw no honeybees. So I'm going to mark that as no as well. There is an option to record management notes here if you wanted to mention something else specific. I did not record any management notes for this survey, so I will leave that blank. The next thing to record is the number of flower species that you encountered during your survey. I saw 1 to 2. So when I click that 1 to 2 option, 2 different, or I can input the names of 2 different plant species. So I only saw 1 different plant species that was not being visited by a bumblebee. I'm just going to put 1 plant in here, which is what was it? Let's say it was garlic mustard. So there's the option to put the common name as well as a scientific name. I actually can't remember the scientific name of garlic mustard, so I'm not going to put that in here right now. But that is, you want to input, as much information as you can about the different plants that you encountered during your survey. So their common names, their scientific names. If you can't identify something to species, you can just put the genus name, that's okay. But if you can identify something to species, it's good to put the species name in there as well. If you are a volunteer with the Atlas, there is also an option to put in your volunteer data. So you would want to record both the first thing that you want to record is when you started your survey effort for that day. So that would include time spent driving, planning your survey, and that sort of thing. So even though I went out at 7, or I started my survey at 7:40 a.m., I started my day at 6 a.m. when I started driving. And then I didn't end my day until 1 p.m. when I got back home. You want to input how many hours you spent organizing and entering your data. So it will take me approximately 1 hour to input this data, so I'm going to record that. And then you also want to record the number of miles that you drove when you were doing your survey. So I drove 50 miles for this survey because it was quite far from my house. If you used any online resources for training, you're going to want to fill that out as well. This does not include attending a live webinar event. It's only if you've used the online resources to train on your own. So you can go ahead and fill that out if you remember the date where you access those resources. So before my survey in 2023, I know that I read the handbook on April 17th, and I spent an hour doing that so I could get familiar with the protocols. That information is really relevant to us because we're really interested in knowing how much time our participants who are volunteers are spending on this effort. Right. I collected bumblebees during this survey, so I am not going to click this button here that says this is a null survey. If I had not collected any bumblebees during this survey, I would click this and then sign below to finish submitting my data. Once I hit that submit button, then that's all I need to do to submit my survey. I did submit I did observe bumblebees during my survey, so I am going to leave that box unchecked and then type in my name to sign my survey form. So when I hit submit, this is going to take me to the next component of the data submission process, which is uploading my bumblebee photos. So to do this, the first thing I want to do is select all my photos. By clicking that button, it will bring me to my file structure for my laptop. So if I know where I have put my photos, I can navigate to them really easily. I want to upload these 5 photos for my first observation of a bee. Right, so I've uploaded 5 different pictures for this bumblebee. The max that you can submit for a bumblebee is 5 pictures. I've gotten all of my favorite angles for the bee here, and I've also included a photo of the flower that the bee was on. The next thing I want to fill out is what species of bumblebee that I observed. I think that this is a brown-belted bumblebee, so I'm going to mark that. For those of you who are less familiar with Bumblebee ID, we have a nifty identification tool, which you can click on to help you identify the bee to species. I am running out of time here for this component, so I am going to skip how to use the Bumblebee identification guide, but basically all you need to do is submit under each one of these questions what the features of the bumblebee are, and then once you fill it out, you can hit select species, and that will give you some options. Don't worry too much about submitting the correct species name for your observation. This data is going to be looked over by experts, and we are going to verify every single one of the observations that we get to Bumblebee Watch. So if you have marked the incorrect bee species, it's no big deal. Doing this just helps us organize our data. This question here, count, is not relevant to folks who participate in the Atlas who are volunteers. This just comes up because I'm an employee of Xerces. It's an option for me to increase the count if I saw more bumblebees than more than one bumblebee of that species type, but that is not an option for you in the regular platform, so we'll skip it. This reference ID section is for you to input a URL if you happen to submit your citing to iNaturalist or another platform, so that way we can link the photos that you submitted here with photos elsewhere. The next thing that you can input is the sex of the bee, so whether or not you think the male or the bee is a queen, worker, male or female. I think this bee is a female, so I'm going to write that. You can also input the floral host if you caught the bee while it was foraging. You would write in the name of the flower species that you saw the bee on while you were collecting. So this bee was on Monarda. So I can write in the name of the floral host. If I would have caught the bee doing some other activity like nest searching or perching on a flower because they were looking for mates if they were a male, I would not input a floral host there, but I would record their behavior in the observation notes section. Right. I did not take any observation notes for this bee, so I'm not going to input any observation notes here. The last question that's on the form is whether or not you want this data to be private. So checking this field will make the location and sighting information private, so it won't come up when people go to view sightings in Bumblebee Watch. And the location information associated with that particular bee will not be publicly available. I don't want this to be private, so I can just go ahead and hit add sighting to add that sighting to my checklist. All right. I am just going to add that one observation for here for you today. If I wanted to add more observations of bumblebees, I would go to add sighting and add another sighting. That will bring up the same set of questions, so I can submit my photos associated with that other sighting, add information about what species it was, what flower host it was on, and that sort of thing. But I'm not going to do so because time is limited and you don't need to watch all of that. So once I have finished submitting all of my data for my survey, I don't need to do anything else. I can either go to add bumblebee sightings and submit another checklist, or I can just exit out here and be done. Okay. I don't think we have time for questions. After that section. So Katie and Jared, do you just want to jump right into Bumblebee ID?
That works for me, unless Katie, you got a question you want to answer at all, or?
No, I think we're good if you want to jump in. There's a few questions that have been asking about male bumblebees, so this is the part here.
Okay, I'll hopefully cover some of that then. All right, can you see my screen and see my cursor?
Yep, looks good.
Cool. All right, yes, so we'll get into some of the Bumblebee ID now. So I'll take you kind of through this. We'll look at bumblebees versus flies, bumblebees versus wasps, bumblebees versus some of our other common bees you might run into, and then we'll get into that male versus female later on. After we get into that, we'll kind of go through the key features of bumblebees when you're trying to really ID it, when you got it on a picture, or when you have it just on your data sheet, and then we'll get into some of the species after that. I'll cover some of the main ones, and then Katie will take over after that to do some of the fun Nebraska ones that I don't get to look at too often. So to be or want to be. So these are all things you might run into. They all look very bumblebee-like, but of these 8 things here, only this one is going to be the bumblebee. You can tell that some of these mimics are really, really convincing. You run into them occasionally, not super often, but when you do run into them, it's nice to know what to look for in terms of mimics versus actual bumblebees. So we'll start off with this. So for bees are going to have 4 wings. Flies are only going to have 2. So you kind of see here, the red markings denote the 4 wing here, and the hind wing here. The flies will only have 2. They're kind of vary in size, but there'll be 2, and then they'll have these little halteres back here that'll always be small. And they'll always look like flies have only 2 wings. So bees will carry large pollen loads in their corbiculas on their hind leg. And then flies will not carry pollen, or not carry very much pollen. Some serpids may carry around a little bit on their legs, but they don't have any structures that really help them carry a large amount of pollen. So if you got a bee, you probably catch a lot of pollen on it. Catch a fly, probably won't have too much on it. Bees are also going to be really hairy. So for bumblebees, you can kind of tell all the hair running all the way up and down the thorax, the legs, the abdomen. Flies are going to be a little more smooth. They might have a little bit of hair. Different species can get hairy, like the mimics before also looked really hairy, but those are kind of exceptions to the rule, and most of those don't have hair all throughout the insect. It's kind of localized and generally pretty short and sparse. Bees will have very dense hairs. Bumblebees will have dense hairs over most of the body. So bumblebees are also going to have long antennae. So you can kind of see here, you can really see them. They come off the head pretty well, pretty obvious when you have them in a vial or you see them in the field. Flies you're kind of tough to see them. So like the syrphid right here, it looks kind of like small horns almost. They're really close to the face, short, stubby. Generally, you're not going to see them hanging off the body all that much. And then finally for bees, the eyes are going to be more on the side of the head, generally going to be smaller than a fly's. Flies, depends on the species, but it can take up almost all of the head. It looks like they're wearing big sunglasses. They're kind of bulgy. So if you maybe have a bumblebee mimic in your vial, What you're going to look for is 2 wings, probably not a lot of pollen, not really seeing too much hair, not seeing too much of an antenna. And the eyes. The eyes are a big giveaway. They're big and bulgy. So that's going to be the flies. So another thing you might run into when you're catching bumblebees is going to be wasps. So just as a general rule of thumb, they're gonna have 4 wings, same way bees do, but their bodies are going to be they're going to look more tough, a little rough, not too much hair, and generally they're just going to be thinner. Thinner in the waist, in the abdomen. They're not going to carry pollen, so again, they don't have those structures to really carry pollen effectively. They're not very hairy, so some species may have a little bit more, but it's not going to be that dense hair that we find on the bumblebees. It's going to be really short, close to the body, and maybe patchy for some wasp species. And then color patterns. So there are some wasps that can kind of look like bumblebees or any bee really. But for bumblebees, the color pattern is going to be the hairs themselves. So they're going to have yellow hairs, black hairs, orange hairs, whereas the wasp is going to be right on the exoskeleton that color is on. So if you can kind of see all the way down, you can see that the actual exoskeleton that's yellow, black, you know that you probably have a wasp or some wasp in there. So there you go. You got an insect in your vial. You know it's a bee. It's not a fly. It's not a wasp. So you want to know, is it a bumblebee? So the main things we're probably going to run into are going to be one of them is going to be the honeybee. So if you're familiar with it, great. If you're not, we'll kind of go through it. So it's going to be a medium-sized bee, so a little bit smaller than a bumblebee. It's going to have this torpedo shape, kind of look like this from the side, looks similar from the top down. And the main giveaway for me is that it's kind of this weird blackish, brownish, orangish color. So it'll have hair on it. It'll look kind of hairy, and it also has these corbicula. So it has those pollen baskets so they can stuff all the pollen into. But so if you see that and you think, oh, well, maybe just take a look at the abdomen. If it's really orange and black, you probably have a honeybee. And the last characteristic, it's kind of a weird one. It's easier to see through a scope, but they'll have hairy eyes. So hair actually comes from the eyes. It's not very common across bees. There's only a couple species that do it, a couple genera, but yeah, hairy eyes, you don't have a bumblebee. This is probably another one. So we get this submitted a little bit, and it is very confusing, admittedly, in some cases, but carpenter bees. So you'll find carpenter bees and bumblebees in the same area a lot of the time. But so for bumblebees, again, the abdomen is going to be really hairy, dense hairs throughout all of the abdomen. Carpenter bee, the biggest flag that I see for this is that the abdomen is going to be shiny. You kind of see right here is a little bit of a reflection coming off of it. That's really what you're looking for, is that shiny abdomen to know it's a carpenter bee. Thorax looks very similar to a bumblebee. So you got to really take a second and kind of move the vial or move the bee around to see if the abdomen is shiny. And then they also don't have corbicula, so they lack those pollen baskets. So instead, their hind leg will just be really densely hairy, look kind of like a pipe cleaner almost. But that's one of the ones you'll run into pretty often when you're sampling for bumblebees. So there you go. You know, it's not a honeybee, it's not a carpenter bee. You do in fact have a bumblebee. So now we'll get into the female versus male. Patterns are sometimes different, so you can get a little iffy here and there. But so first off, so we're looking at female versus male bumblebees. So females generally are going to be more well kept, well groomed. So when I say that, what we're looking for is this short hair. So they're kind of all short and even hairs. They kind of lay flat a little bit more. Just generally speaking, they just look like a clean bee. So males are going to look a little shaggier. So generally males are going to be outside the hive, not really grooming themselves too much, but it looks almost like it's like a static char. It's all static. You got it riled up almost. But the hairs are kind of almost look like they come off perpendicular of the body. That's kind of like the easiest way to really tell. It just kind of looks a little rugged almost. The second kind of trait we're going to look at, so again, those pollen baskets, we're trying to hammer this home. It's not always the most obvious. It takes a little bit of practice to really see what those pollen baskets look like. But this is a great picture. So this is a female bee. You can kind of tell there's almost a triangular shape for the corbicula. It's smooth on the inside, so you got these hairs on the left and right. But then in the middle, there's this nice smooth groove. That's where they pack all their pollen into. And since males do not carry pollen, they don't really need that. So for male bumblebees, it's going to be right. This is where the corbicula would be, but instead it's just covered in hair. So also you can kind of tell from this diagram, you got the female bee, got a nice triangular shape, groove in the middle. The male bee is going to be a little bit more teardrop shaped, a little more rounded, and there's no groove in the middle. There's just going to be hair throughout the whole part of that leg. The next one, so abdominal segments. So female bees will have 6 abdominal segments. Kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is right here. Then 6 is this tiny pointy one right here. Males will have 7. So this is kind of a hard character to get if your bee kind of scrunches up a little too much. Sometimes if you get a stinger to come out though, you'll know it's a female. So I guess we'll cover that down at the bottom, but that'll be another thing to look for. And just generally males, that 7th abdominal segment doesn't make the bee insanely longer, but it will make the bee a little bit longer that after some practice, you might be able to pick up on. Another one, so antennal segments. So this is one where Jenny was talking about having like really high quality equipment. So this is one where if you have high quality equipment, you'll be able to pick up on it. If you don't, like I just have an iPhone that I used all last year, doesn't pick up the antennal segments as well. But counting from here, female bees will have 10 segments, where male bees will have 11 antennal segments. Again, that's one that I'm probably going to try. It's easier to look at online through pictures. You can kind of pick up on it easier. It's kind of hard to do in the field though. So now eyes. So female bee, the eye is generally more inset. It's almost looks flush with the face for the most part. It's on the side of the head. For the males, for some species of bumblebee, will be really big and buggy. It's kind of interesting. So it's like Chrysiox, brown belted and black and gold kind of spring to mind, where you run into those, where the eyes, if you look at it, especially from top down, you can really see they come off the head. They're not really inset. They're kind of bubbling off almost. But that's not for every male species. It's just for a couple. But after you see a couple, you kind of get it. It's pretty obvious. And finally, like I mentioned before, females will have a stinger, and the males will not have a stinger. So you can handle them if you're brave enough, the males. If you have a female, probably don't handle it. Just leave it to wake up from the cold on its own. So there we go. We got female versus male. Now the final step is going to be a normal bumblebee versus a cuckoo bumblebee. So for the conventional bumblebee, the non-cuckoo, you're going to have really densely hairy, kind of really hammer this home. They're going to be densely hairy on the abdomen, whereas the cuckoo, not quite as densely hairy. It's really sparse in the middle. You might get some more on the sides of the abdomen, get a little bit more. It does look a little bit like a carpenter bee, but there's going to be more hair here. It's just a little more sparse, a little bit more on the sides, but will look a little bit like a carpenter bee, but have sparse hairs compared to the dense hairs. And it will also, the cuckoo will not have a corbicula, so it'll be reduced down. It'll look more male, more male-like, I guess, in that regard. Whereas again, the conventional bumblebee will have the nice corbicula, a nice smooth groove that you kind of see a shine on. And there we go. So we'll move into the species now. So for our species, what we're going to kind of look at, so what Missouri, you'll get something like this on this data sheet. It'll give you all the species that you might encounter with a little bit of a blurb about what to look for off the bat. Nebraska got a lot more to work with, but same principle. You'll have one of these sheets to really check in with you in the field. It's nice to have a little bit of a reference. And you also get one of these. So this will kind of take you through what to look for from the head, thorax, abdomen, kind of run you through a checklist, which is what I'll do now, but you'll have this with you on hand in the field if you decide to bring it with you. So we'll start with the head. So typically when we're starting with Bumblebee ID, I'm going to start with the head, and it's got 2 parts. So it's got the front of the head, which is kind of like the face area, and then the top of the head, which is kind of the top of the head. It's a really small kind of triangle of hair. Next to the thorax, it's the middle part of the bee. It's where the legs attach. It's where the wings attach. So you know thorax by those characters. And finally, you got the abdomen. So again, for females, you'll have 6 tergites. For males, you'll have 7. And so what we're looking for the abdomen usually is going to be the color pattern. So when I talk about color pattern, for the most part, it's going to be talking about the abdomen and how each abdominal tergite is colored. So we'll run through the common ones. So here, these maps are going to be where we found them, last couple of years. And this is common Eastern, so bombus impatiens. So the front of the face is going to be black. The top of the head is going to be yellow. You kind of see that top of the head right here, some yellow hairs. Thorax is mostly yellow, and then the center, so like kind of like the circle area, is going to kind of bleed out and be this nice big circle or teardrop shape of black hairs in the middle of the thorax. And then T1, so we're moving down to the abdomen now. So we've done head, thorax, moving into the abdomen, which is kind of where we usually look. T1 is going to be yellow, and T2 through 6 are going to be black. So the first tergite can be kind of small. It might be hard to see. Sometimes if it's a smaller bee or if it's kind of curled up weird, it almost looks like that first tergite is part of the thorax. So you might have to really kind of move the bee around a little bit to make sure that only that first tergite is yellow. But if the first one's yellow, the rest are black, you know I have a common Eastern, which is pretty common, as the name implies, throughout most of our study areas. Next, we have the two spots, so Bombus bimaculatus. So the front of the face is going to be black, kind of shown right here. Top of the head, yellow, kind of like the impatiens before. You're going to have more of a dot in the thorax. You have a black spot in the middle of the thorax. The rest of it will be yellow. And then T1 right here, yellow. But T2 is where we start to get some color. So as soon as you get color on T2, you know it's not an impatiens. You know it's not the common Eastern. If it has this nice W shape, that's what we're looking for the two spot. It might not be quite this big. It might be about half the size. But if it gets this W or this kind of two spotty shape, you know you have a bimac on you. And then the rest, so T3 through 6, will all be black. Or females. These are just females. Should be what you run into for the most part. Brown belted, so Bombus griseaculus. Again, this is probably one of the more common ones you're going to run into. I think it's probably the one I ran into the most last year in Missouri. But the front of the face is going to be black. Top of the head is going to be black. It's going to be similar to the bimac, where you have the yellow thorax with that kind of nice concise circle on the thorax of black. And then you go T1, yellow, kind of like the last couple. But now we're moving into this nice crescent shape on T2. So the crescent shape, and as the name implies, brown belted. It could be brown, could be yellow, could be like a weird gray color, kind of depends on the bee. But it's going to be this nice crescent shape that'll connect all the way to the side. So you won't have that two spot or that W shape. It'll be more of a half circle the whole way. And then there's kind of a secondary trait is that this is one of the more well-kept bees. So it kind of looks like it has a buzz cut almost. The shores are really short and even, a little bit on the abdomen, but really the thorax is going to look really nicely kept. Southern plain. So this is one of our species of conservation concern in Missouri, I think in Nebraska too. Front of the head, black, top of the head, black. And now you're going to get into kind of more of a stripe. So we've moved away from that dot, kind of that spot in the middle of the thorax. Now we have a nice black stripe between the wings. So if you see that, you know you probably don't have one of the three more common species. You move into T1. So the first abdominal segment, it's going to be yellow. Second one's going to be yellow. And the rest, T3 through 6, will be black. But the main character that we're going to look for is going to be the hairs on the abdomen are really, really flat. So you kind of see here, they lay almost against the body, especially the second abdominal segment and the third are going to be like really, really against the body. It's really, after you see a couple, you realize, man, that really is different. The rest of the bees the hair stands up a little bit. But this one, T2 and 3, really, really flat hairs on the abdomen. Now we'll move into two that are a little more similar. So this is the American bumblebee. So the front of the face is black, top of the head black. Got this yellow in front of the wings right here. It might look like it has a stripe, but it won't be quite as defined. But you'll have a kind of black stripe in the middle, and then you might have yellow or black behind the wings. And then moving into T1, so the lower half, the bottom half of T1 will have this nice yellow yellow on it, and then T2 and 3 will be yellow. But really what we're looking for is this nice, fully connected line on T1, as well as the black hairs on top of the head. So the next one then is going to be really, really similar to black and gold, bombus or comus. The front of the face is black, but then the top of the head is what we're looking for. And this one you need some good pictures of because that top of the head is going to be yellow. So that's looking right here. You can kind of see it looks like yellow eyebrows. I think you guys have coined it as yellow eyebrows, which is kind of accurate when you start to see it. The T1 is going to be mostly black right here. So compared to the American, where it's going to be more of a half of it will be yellow, and T3 or T2 and T3 will both be yellow, with the rest being black. So it looks kind of similar, but the differences are going to look like this. So the black and gold, Bombus oricomis right here, it's got those nice yellow eyebrows that are really, really kind of stunning. Whereas the American will not. It'll just have black hairs on top of the head, not those yellow eyebrows. And that's probably the most obvious character that I look for in pictures is, did you get a good picture of the head? And can you see that color difference? And then again, if you can get a good picture of the abdomen, this is the American, has this nice half of T1 yellow. So that'll be another one. If you can get a good picture of it, it's really, really helpful to get. I think we'll be moving on to Katie. You should have control.
Okay, so I have 8 more species that we're going to cover here. Most of these are going to be, oh, Jared, I think you just stopped sharing.
You good?
There it is. Okay. Oh man, hold on. Sorry, we're trying to do remote control through each other's screen. It's a new feature in Zoom. Okay, so the yellow bumblebee, again, mostly this one's going to show up in Nebraska, though it could show up in Missouri. All the orange dots that you see on the screen are where they have been detected in surveys so far throughout the atlas. This is a very, very yellow bee, as the name implies. It has a really nice, clean, narrow band between the wings, like you can see in the photo there. Can you guys see my mouse? Is that moving around? No. Okay, well, we'll move on without it. It has a very nice clean black band. Segments on the abdomen 1 through 4 are all yellow, and then the very tip of its abdomen will be black. The key feature for distinguishing this one from a male American bumblebee or Bombus pennsylvanicus is looking at those facial features and the thorax. So there's going to be some more black hairs on the thorax, on the top of the thorax, on the side of the thorax, compared to this yellow bumblebee who will not have any black on the side of the thorax or at the rear of the abdomen. The half black bumblebee, this is a species that's more tied to forested areas, so you might still find it in a grassland or an open field somewhere, but more likely you're going to find it if there's an area with trees nearby. This one has the first 2 abdominal segments are fully yellow, so different from the 2-spotted bumblebee in that the yellow on that second abdominal segment completely covers the abdomen. There's no W shape, there's no crescent shape like you might see in the brown-belted bumblebee. It goes all the way across. This bee has black on the front of its face, but it will have yellow hairs on the top of its head. It has a nice a nice black dot in the center of that yellow thorax. It's not an uncommon bee. Well, I guess I take that back. In Missouri, it is a species of concern and one that we're looking for, but in other parts where it's covering more of its range, it doesn't seem to be as in concern as it is in Missouri, but because Missouri is towards the southern edge of that range, we're seeing more declines in it there. So if you do happen to come across this bee, it will be a really exciting find. Hunt's bumblebee. This one is typically found in western Nebraska, although you can see there have been a few like up in the Valentine area. And last summer, actually, Rachel Hall, I don't know if she's on here today, she actually found one in her yard, which was really exciting to find one in Lincoln or Omaha. I think there's only been 2 observations of this species in the Lincoln, Omaha area. So pretty cool. This is a really nice bee, as in its color pattern doesn't seem to fluctuate very much. So in a lot of bumblebee species, we see variation in color pattern even within a species. But with Hunt's bumblebee, we don't see a lot of variation in color pattern. So that is really lovely to find in a bee. For this color pattern on the abdomen, you'll see yellow on T1, orange on T2 and 3, and yellow on T4. It's got a very yellow face, really beautiful bee. I always love coming across these orange banded bees in the field. The Nevada bumblebee, again, more of a Western species for Nebraska folks, although it has showed up a few times in central Nebraska. This is a very large, robust species of bumblebees. Oftentimes you'll hear bumblebees before you see them, but this one kind of takes the prize for size. It has a nice black dot in the center of its otherwise yellow thorax. It has yellow hairs on T1, T2, and 3, and the rest of this bee is black. This one does look pretty similar to the Morrison's bumblebee, which is a species that we're looking for in Nebraska, which should be the next one here. So this is Morrison's bumblebee, looks very, very similar to the Nevada bumblebee, both in size and color pattern. These are both really robust species. The main difference here is that the Morrison bumblebee does not have any black hair on the top of that thorax. So there's no stripe between the wings. There's no dot in the center of the thorax. It's just pure yellow. And you can see, if you're familiar with milkweed flowers, just how large this species actually is. It's taking up quite a few flowers there on that milkweed head. This species was actually found in Nebraska last summer, twice on separate occasions, which was really exciting because we hadn't detected it in the atlas until last summer. Before that, the last time it was seen in the state was 2016, just from someone putting it on iNaturalist. So again, if you do have these incidental observations when you're not surveying, definitely submit those because it could be a really cool find. So this is a target species for Nebraska. So anybody that's going out to survey west, near Scotts Bluff, Wildcat Hills, if you get up north towards the grasslands, that's where the species is going to be. It likes those drier areas. The Western bumblebee has not been seen in Nebraska since 2001. It is still a target species though, and if you are surveying again out near Chadron or the Pine Ridge in the very northwest corner of the state, that's where this species used to reside and is where we're hoping that it still does. The color pattern that we see in the Black Hills, at least for this bee, is like the photo shown here on the page, where on T2, it sort of has a crescent of black like you would see on the brown-belted bumblebee. There's a black crescent on T2, and then the rest of that segment is yellow. The unique thing about this species is that it usually has a white butt. So you can see those tail there on T4 and T5, there's white hairs. That's pretty unique to a few bumblebee species. So if you catch a bumblebee with a white butt in Nebraska, you're going to be a lifesaver. So many people are going to be excited. So keep your eyes out if you head west. And I see we're at 7:30, so I'm just gonna go through these last 2 really quickly. These are both cuckoo bumblebees that we're looking for in Nebraska as part of the target zone program. Neither of them have been seen in the state since 1999. Suckling cuckoo bumblebee here. There's a few observations from Dawes and Sioux County. Has a really unique sort of curve to the abdomen. If you watched the previous webinar of part 1, Jenny talked about how the cuckoo bees have these really sort of curved abdomens because they're sort of built for battle, right? They're trying to usurp an existing bumblebee nest, so they need a little bit more size and strength to take over the existing queen. And the last one, a variable cuckoo bumblebee. This is probably one of the most rare bumblebee species, and it hasn't been seen in Nebraska since 1999, but that was kind of the last time that anyone saw it in the United States. So we're pretty worried about this bee. It has been petitioned to be listed on the Endangered Species Act. There are a few target zones for this bee that are in eastern Nebraska as well as western Nebraska. So again, if you want to sort of target your surveys and look for particular species, you can do that by visiting the grid map. And I think the last one here is just resources for bumblebee identification. So Jared mentioned we have the one pager that you can take into the field. In Nebraska, we created a guide using Atlas data that you can find online. These other ones here, the Forest Service guides, bumblebees of the Eastern United States and bumblebees of the Western United States, are both free online guides that you can download as a PDF. The Bumblebees of North America book all the way on the left there, that is probably my favorite book. If you want to learn more about bumblebees, you really want to get into identification, I would highly recommend that guide for you. And I think that's all I've got. Right on the dot, 7:32. Yeah, there were some good questions that came in though, so we will write these up and send them out with the webinar link, and be sure to send you any other links that we talked about during this training webinar. We'll send those out. Jenny, do you want to add anything else?
I do. Thank you everybody for spending your evening with us today. I know that 2 hours is a really long time to spend on a webinar. Pretty much everybody has stayed on the entire time. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you and all of the time that you spend on this effort. It would not be possible without you. We hope to see some of you at our field training events. And as always, if you have any questions or things that you want to ask us, please reach out via email. We're always happy to hear from you all. And with that, I think we can end the webinar. So goodbye, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.